In today's video, we're talking again about how to get a nice clean low end in your mix. This video is all about EQ. We're going to give you 3 straightforward EQ techniques that, regardless of genre or style, if you apply them, you're going to get a nice clean low end every time. So let's take a look at this. So the first thing you want to do to clean up your low end is to go into all of your other instruments that are not the bassy instruments and make sure that they don't have any information going on down there. So for example, this rhythm guitar back here, you can see on the meter, it does have stuff going on all the way down to the bottom, 15 and 10 hertz, that you do not need in your mix. And that is all stuff, even if it's only a few decibels, that is going to compete with your bass and your kick. So for this guitar, I've high passed it off just above the kick's fundamental. I've actually high passed it off all the way up to 80 hertz. So nothing below 80 hertz is coming through that guitar. And if you take your high pass up too high, you'll hear the guitar thin out. And it starts to compromise the sound. So if you're curious where to find it, sweep your high pass until an instrument, whatever it is, sounds too thin, and then dial it back. But for guitars, a safe bet is around 100 hertz or 80 hertz. But that little bit right there is removing frequencies in the bottom spectrum that not only compete with the kick and bass, but this adds to the overall headroom of a mix. So the general rule here is if you don't need it on the bottom, high pass it out. So that's the guitar. Now let's take a look at this piano here. Now, pianos, just by their nature, they do create a lot of really low information down where it would be in the subwoofer, and you do not want it in your subwoofer. Unless maybe you're doing a song that is featuring just piano and vocal. Other than that, you're probably going to high pass a lot of that stuff out. And here I have the high pass set at 60 hertz, so the low end of the piano will be competing with a lot of the bass, but it's not going to compete with the kick drum. And that does not hollow out the piano too much. And this is in a larger mix anyway, so the piano is not sounding huge and full. It just needs to cut through in specific places. So you're going to want to high pass something like that as well. And even this organ that's way in the background, organs create a lot of information down here. Everything below 100 hertz, I've just shaved it off, not needed. So high passing is your first technique for a clean low end. And then even when it comes to a kick drum, I'm in the camp that you can high pass your kick drum as well. I have it high passed at 30 hertz. My fundamental, like we said, is around 54. And even if I had a big fat subwoofer and I was pushing a lot of air, I actually don't want anything below 30 or 20 hertz coming out of this kick. Maybe in EDM you do, but it's still something to be mindful of. Just because you're dealing with kick and bass doesn't mean you shouldn't use a high pass, at least very modestly. And I've done the same thing with the bass. The bass is high past the lowest, it's down at 30. And I don't want anything down in 10 or 15 range at all, because if I have a subwoofer going, even on a genre like this that doesn't typically call for it, I want that subwoofer to be clean. I want it to be pushing only what I want in there and not be pushing a bunch of mud. So step number 1, high pass everything that you don't need. So now on to step 2, which is what I like to call the peaks and valleys approach. And the point of this is to clean up as much of the low mids as possible, because that's what helps give the impression to the listener that the lows are the standalone structure in your mix, which is what you want for clear low end. Now we're going to talk about carving out low mids from the kick and bass, but you're going to want to apply this to the other instruments as well. If you can afford to lose some 200, 250 in guitars or bass or whatever, then go ahead and dial it on out of there. Don't overdo it, but the more separation you can create, the better. And then as far as the space between sounds and the peaks and valleys to give you clarity, brings us back to our kick drum. Not only have I accented the fundamental with a dynamic EQ to gain some control over it, it's got a big fat boost there at the fundamental to help it punch through the mix. I've also cut out 9 dB at 220 and kind of the muddy range of the kick. And even though there's not much information in the kick there, I don't hollow out all of it. But this separation here at the muddy low mid range is going to accent everything above and below that valley. Any given sound will sound louder if you take out the things on either side of it. So let's take this bass guitar for example. Now, these are going to be a little bit over-dramatic, heavy-handed moves, but it's going to illustrate the point. So let's say I hollow the low mids out of this bass at 200 hertz. Now, you can hear that by doing that, if I carve it way out, that the higher information in the bass and the lower now both sound louder and more accented and more standalone just because I've removed what's in between. And likewise, say I do the same for the piano, but I do that at 300 hertz. Now the low information of the piano is more of its own thing, and the rest of the highs seem to sound louder even though they're not. That's just because of the illusion of separation. And just to emphasize the point, let's hollow out this rhythm guitar here at 400. So same thing. This is also a great opportunity to remove mids in slightly different places. So if, for example, your rhythm guitar could lose some information at 400, and that gives space for your piano to occupy 400, but you can dip your piano out a little lower than that, you can create open holes for other instruments by carving out the things that you can that don't compromise the overall sound. So when you're cleaning up your low mids, do it with each of your instruments where you can and don't overdo it, but that gives you a chance to separate not just the lows in your overall mix from everything above it, but it also gives you a chance to create holes for each independent instrument so the other instruments can live happily in those holes. But just 1 or 2 dB when and where you can in each instrument will make a big difference. That's a really important audio concept to understand, is the illusion that separation creates for the human ear. All right, and the last step to this EQ process here, step 3, is all about mid and side EQ. Now, your average listener is just kind of subconsciously acclimated to hearing the kick and the bass and even the snare and vocals as just driving hard down the middle. And the other instruments kind of drift towards the side the further back they go, like rhythm guitars and pianos and keys and synths. That all kind of takes up your side channel. But the main driving force of the song, the low end, all needs to be right down the middle. So let's get into that. Now, so back to our kick. We've added another EQ onto the effects chain here. Now this is a big fat low shelf taking off everything only in the side channel, and I've swept it all the way up into the muddy low and mid range, so I know that everything below there is only mid frequencies. There's no sides left in the bottom of the kick. And if you need, you're going to add another boost to the fundamental here, like this one is another 5 dB at 54 hertz. If you need something like that, just make sure that's set to only mid. That way you're given that extra low-end thud in the kick drum where it's living nice and easy on its own there with nothing interfering. That's right down the middle. And then real quick, you know, a dip like this is in the muddy range around 250. That's our peaks and valleys method there of making sure that, and this is the whole spectrum, mid and side. That's all carved out. We don't really need that from the kick in this frequency range, and that's what helps give the human ear that separation, which makes the low end appear as its own structure. And then where an actual kick hits the skin of the drum, that typically is ringing out somewhere around 800-900, maybe 1K, depending on the kick. A little boost there, that adds that presence of the kick to kick through the mid-range. There's no side going on in there. And then the high transient of the kick that cuts through a mix is typically around 5K. So I got another little boost up there, just a little bit, but it's only in the mid-range. So those cuts and boosts right there, managing the mid and side on the kick drum, just help tell the human ear that that kick is cutting through the mix right down the middle. And then another thing you can do is get into the other instruments in your mix and carve out a little bit of holes only in the mid-range there. So say, for example, these rhythm guitars and the piano, you could do a little cut only in the mid-range there at 5K to make sure you create a mid-hole for the kick to live. And it's kind of similar on the bass. This next EQ in the bass effects chain has this big low cut here. This is only on the sides, and that's taken out everything from the muddy range, low mids on down. So anything below there is only living in the mid frequencies. And similarly, if you give the bass a boost down here, this is just 1.2 dB at 100 hertz, but it's only in the mid channel. And so crank that up a little bit more than necessary so you can really hear it. That's just driving the low end of the bass there right down the middle, nothing in the sides. So definitely manage the mid and side of everything that's going on in your low range. Like if you had floor toms ringing out in the low range too, same thing. As far as the low end of the toms would be concerned, cut the side out of it. You could pan the toms and have side information going on in the mids and in the upper mids and highs, but keep the low frequencies centered. But there you go. There's some great techniques that I think are really going to help you out. If you follow these 3 techniques, you high pass everything that you don't need, and you cut out all the low mids that you don't need, and you center those low frequencies right down the middle, and you take these steps to tell the human ear that the kick and the bass and typically even the snare and vocals all live in the middle and everything else drifts off around it, then you're going to have a nice clean low end, and you're going to drive that groove and drive that beat right down the middle, and it's going to help carry the entire song. That'll give you a nice clean tight low end, and your subwoofers are only going to be pushing out what you want, and everything will stay nice and clear, and nothing will build up and creep over the red line. So there you go. I really hope you liked that. Definitely check out the other video on clean low end that is all about side chaining. And that video gets into 808s and sub bass and stuff. So if you have questions about that between these 2 videos, I think you'll have a lot of tools to manage the low end. And let me know what you think in the comments. And also, if there's any other topic that you want me to cover, let me know what you think down there. And I'll catch you on the next one.